Okay, there we go. Wow, that was a struggle. Alrighty, so welcome back. We seem to have had some technical difficulties there, but I've got that worked out. So welcome back, or if you're watching just this one, welcome to Science Explosion. Just again, my name is Zach. This is Hudson Public Library, and we're going to be talking about mummies. So we've lost quite a bit of time due to our, again, technical difficulties. So I'm going to jump right in. So we today are making mummies. So I'm really excited to show you guys how to do that. So what you'll need is a piece of fruit. An apple works really well, but if you don't have that, then something like strawberries or peaches, whatever you've got on hand will be good. And then a hot dog. If you don't have a hot dog, then something, another piece of meat will work, but hot dogs are good because they're fairly cheap. We're going to be making two different kinds of mummies. You'll also need some baking soda and you will need some salt. Just ordinary table salt is fine. And then you're just going to need a ruler to make some measurements, or a tape measure should work fine. If you have it, then a scale will be really useful. If you don't, I don't actually have one with me right now, and so that is fine, but you're going to get a few extra things out of doing that. Then you'll need a container, and then you'll need a knife to slice up your apple with, and then also got a cutting board. And so that's what you need. So let's jump right into this. So let's start out. I'm really excited to show you guys the final results of my mummies because I have not actually seen them yet. So I've been very curious about what those are going to look like. This is another long-term one, so these ones will take a little while. All right, so let's get started here. I'm going to start with my hot dog. All right, so I've got a package of hot dogs right here. I got the Bar S because they're cheap. But any kind will work. So I've got that right here. And I will set that aside. All right, so now I will take that, put that on my cutting board, and grab my ruler. I had to reach behind my laptop there. All right, so measuring this hot dog, and they're all standard, then it is, what do we got? 12.5 centimeters. And I've got a sticky note here of what I labeled my original one as. And, oh, that's interesting. I had just measured that as 12 centimeters. So I might be a little more accurate now, or this one might actually have just a little bit of difference between that. So my original hot dog that I had mummified was 12 centimeters. This new one I've got is 12.5. So this is why it's going to be useful for you to take a measurement of it. And the reason I'm doing it in centimeters, you might be wondering, instead of inches. So this does have an inches on it as well, but that is going to be the metric scale, anything in meters, centimeters, millimeters, and that is the standard way that you measure things in science, because most of the world uses the metric system. We are one of, I think it's 2 or 3 countries that use the imperial system is what it's called. And if you want to talk about that more, I always think that's an interesting topic, but I'm not going to talk too long on that. All right, and then, so it's 12 centimeters long, 1.8 centimeters tall, and 2 centimeters wide. All right, so now that I've got this hot dog, what you're going to do is I've got a plastic bag, and the reason I did this is because it'll fit well in this and it'll seal, but if you want to use less waste, then feel free to put it in any sort of container that it will fit in. And then you're going to take your baking soda. I have just a little mini one here. And then you are going to pour that. I don't know how well you can see that I'm pouring in there. Pour that into the bag or container, whatever you're using for that. So pour that. I have a little box. You're going to want to fill it so that it's about that much. That is about one of these little boxes, which is 8 ounces. And so just enough that you're sure you'll be able to cover the entire hot dog plus a little bit extra. If you have too little, it's not going to be enough. All right, so you're going to fill that up. Then, once you've got that, you're going to take your hot dog, plop it in there, and then you are going to make sure that it's covering the entirety of the hot dog, all of your baking soda. And you don't want any point of the hot dog sticking out. You can't really see it very well. Sticking out like that, because if you do that, then that part isn't going to be touching this mix. And this mix, there's a technical name for it. It's called a desiccant. But that's really just a fancy way of saying it's going to dry it. So the goal here is to dry out your hot dog. So that is, in a nutshell, what mummification is. So a mummy is something that is a living thing that gets dried out. And so let's take a look at our mummified hot dog. So you can see in this bag, I've got it covered in baking soda. So I'm going to reach in, and this has been in here for a solid 3 weeks. And I would recommend keeping it in there. And honestly, it could probably go for a little bit longer. I'm going to try to scrape some of this off so you can definitely see the color that it is, because it has changed color on me. All right, so, and it's definitely shrunk. So I'll let you take a look. This is the fresh one, and this is the mummified one. So if I put them right next to each other, you can see that's significantly shorter. So let's take a look at how much shorter it is. So remember, the original one is 12 centimeters, and this one is 11 centimeters. It is shrunk by an entire centimeter. And the original one was 2 wide. This is 1.7 wide and 1.5 tall. So it is definitely shrunk. So all of the shrinking that's come out of this has just been the moisture. That's mostly water that's come out of that. All right, so this hot dog has transformed into this one, and that has just been by taking the moisture out of it. So you might be asking yourself, why would you want to take the moisture out of something? Well, when the moisture is taken out of a living thing, well, once living, then it will last longer. So if you've ever eaten a piece of dried fruit or a piece of jerky, then that's a really good example of what drying can do to something that used to have moisture in it. So if you were to take a peach and set it on your counter, it would probably last maybe a week or two, if you're lucky. But if you set a dried peach on your counter, that could last for months or maybe years, because the moisture in something will make it go bad faster. And the reason for that has completely to do with microorganisms. So this hot dog, if I were to leave this sitting on the counter for 3 weeks, it would not be a pretty sight. Bacteria, mold would love to get a hold of this thing. They would eat it up. But because I took the water out of this one, and it's still got a little bit in there, I could leave it in for longer. But because I took the moisture out of this one, there isn't that water in it that the bacteria and the mold needs to thrive. So by taking the water out of something, you're making it last longer. All right, so I know everybody, when they hear the word mummify and mummy, you're probably like me and you think of Egypt. And there's a very good reason for that. So Egypt is famous for its mummies, and Egypt does a whole ceremony to get their mummies ready. But what a lot of people don't know is they started out a lot simpler than that. So the original mummies in Egypt, so thousands of years ago, came about on accident. So when people were buried in the sand works just like this baking soda mix. It's a desiccant. and so it will dry things out. So when they found somebody who was buried in the sand and then baked in the hot sun, and there's very little rain in Egypt, then they noticed, wow, they dried out. So they started to think, this is a really interesting process. It makes the bodies of the people be preserved. What if we add to this process? So then you probably know some of the things that the ancient Egyptians decided to add to them. So there are really cool things in there. So the ancient Egyptians, one of the things they would do is they would take out some of the organs. So I know this is a little bit gross, but they would take out some of the organs and then they would store them in jars called canopic jars. And those were used to help the body last even better. Because, as anybody who's been hunting knows, once you hunt something like a deer or a rabbit, you're going to want to take some of the organs out because they can cause it to spoil really quickly. But then the Egyptians would also do things like put perfume on it to make the body smell better. And then I'm sure everybody knows they wrapped them in bandages. And that was one of the final steps in there. You might not know that they also would put gold and jewels inside of those layers of bandages. It took days to make an Egyptian-style mummy. Of quite hard work, actually. This is pretty easy. We're just putting our hot dog in some baking soda. All right, but the second one, you're going to need 2 ingredients. This one was just 1. And the second thing we're going to mummify is an apple. All right, so you've probably had some dried fruit, and you may have even had dried apple slices. And there's a couple different ways of drying something out. So we saw putting it in a desiccant mixture. So remember, desiccant is just something that dries it out. Ours was baking soda. You can also use hot, dry sand. Now, keep in mind, if you're trying to do this in Iowa, that it rains a lot more here than it does in ancient Egypt. And so keep in mind that you're going to want to make sure to protect it from the rain if you're going to dry something out in the sand. But if you have sand, you could easily dry out that hot dog or an apple if you have a long period of no rain in that sand. You can also, if it's hot and dry enough, dry things out just in the sun. So recently I actually just dried out some peppers, and all I did was put them on a baking sheet, and it's been very hot and dry this summer, and so that easily dried them all out. All right, but this apple, I'm going to show you another desiccant mixture for it. So first thing we're going to want to do, I'm going to cut this apple in half. You could put it in whole, but keep in mind, this apple has a skin on it. And the skin serves a lot of purposes. One is keeping out pests, but another big one is keeping the moisture in that apple. You notice that it's dry on the outside where I'm touching it now, but as soon as I cut it open on my cutting board, and I'm using a butter knife, so I'm having to use quite a bit of force to do that. Alrighty. So you can notice that it's moist on the inside of that apple. Alright, so now we've gotten that, and once you've got that cut open, you've exposed the moisture. So if I were to just put the mixture on the outside of this apple, it would have a hard time actually reaching the inside. But now that I've done this, it's going to do it easier. So what I did for my original apple was I had cut it in half like this, and then I used a vegetable peeler before, but let's see how I can just do with a butter knife. So remember, if you're using a knife, especially a sharper knife, to talk to your parents. Ooh, this is not going to be pretty. I'm making myself an apple jack-o'-lantern. And woo, this guy does not look friendly. So I made a face here. Alright, and you might be asking, why did I make a face in this? So I did it just because I think it's kind of fun, but also because by opening it up here, I have made this apple a lot more exposed in the moisture there. Alright, so for this one, you could use just your basic baking soda recipe, but I think that there's one that's going to work even better for an apple, and that is a mix of baking soda and salt. So if you take 1 part baking soda and 1 part salt. So it's going to be a half and half. So if you get a cup of baking soda, you'll also need a cup of salt. And you're going to put that into a container. Same thing as you did with your hot dog. So remember, and I've got my salt right here. So baking soda and salt, it doesn't really matter what kind. This is iodized salt, but you don't need to use that. Any sort of salt will do. If you have sea salt, that'll also work. But usually just plain old kitchen salt is going to be the cheapest option for you anyway. So remember, this is what my original looked like. And I have had this apple sitting in here, both halves. Oh, that's an interesting smell. I don't know whether that completely mummified. We'll see. I've had these in here for a solid 3 weeks, same as the other one. And so you're just going to want to stir together your baking soda and salt. Ooh, this guy looks angry. All right, so I'm working on getting it out of the eyes so I can show you a good picture. So if you were to leave an apple on the shelves, even an uncut apple on the shelves for 3 weeks, it would almost not be there. If you put an apple slice, that would go bad very quickly. All right, but let's take a look. So let's compare my two faces. This is the fresh-faced original. And are you ready for the creepy looking mummy that we made? So this, if you don't want to see what it'll look like, because I think this one's pretty fun looking. If you want to be surprised by what yours turns out, then look away or pause. But here's the original, and here is our mummified version. So I'm going to hold that up there. Look at that scary face. So I'll show you the back of them too. And I've had this apple for the same length of time as I've had this one, but I haven't had it cut up. I've just had it whole in the pantry so that they'd be the same type of apple so I can compare the two. So here's the back of this one, and here is the back of this one. So you can see this one has dried out almost completely. I can squeeze this one, and I can notice that it has just a little bit of moisture in it. If you've had dried fruit, you'll notice that there is still going to be just a little bit of moisture in it. But this one is actually dried out enough that I think you could be, if you cleaned off all the mixture on it, you could be pretty confident that if I were to put this into a container, it would stay like this for as long as dried fruit would. Oh, look at that. Look at that wonderful face. Alrighty, so you can see what the remains of my mixture were there too. So remember, this is just salt and baking soda. This is stuff that you can get easily at home. But I think it makes a pretty fun result. There we go. I'm getting it off the eyes too. So you can see there, now that I've cleaned off the eyes, you can see it looks the same as the back there, that it's completely dried out. And when I feel this, you might notice the way that it moves. It's very, very rubbery. So, all right. So I would definitely encourage everybody to try that one at home. It's a fairly easy experiment. And all you need, remember, is baking soda or baking soda and salt, and you're going to get some really fun results out of that. I just love seeing these two faces together. That's so fun. Alrighty. So remember, if you have any comments, any questions, I will take those in the comments, because remember, I cannot see you, even though you can see me. Also, I'd like you to see the side views of this. This apple has shrunk considerably, which makes sense. A huge portion of apples are made up of water. Now, do you know what has the most water in it? What food? So I don't know if I know for sure the one that has the absolute most in the world, but the common foods that you'll eat, do you know what has the highest percentage of it is water? I think it's kind of funny. Alrighty, so I'm guessing that the most common guess is going to be watermelon, which is a great guess, but it's wrong. So a watermelon, you might not be surprised to hear that it's an astounding 98% water, which is a lot of water. A lot of fruits are somewhere around 85, 90%. But there's something that has even more, and that's lettuce. So just your iceberg lettuce is going to be 99% water. Now you might be thinking, well, I can squeeze a watermelon and all that water pours out, but that's not what happens when I squeeze a piece of lettuce. And you are completely right in that. So even though a lettuce is a higher portion of water, and if you squeeze it hard enough, you'll definitely get water out, trust me. Um, Even though it's a higher percentage of water, it has a structure that's very different from that of a watermelon. Alrighty, so we've talked just a little bit about mummies. So remember that oh wow, words. Mummification is a process of drying things out. There are lots of different ways you can do that, whether you are using a desiccant mixture, which all a desiccant is something that dries it out, or whether you're baking in the sun. You can also dry things out in the oven, or some people actually get a food dehydrator. But I think it's fun to try to use just the things around you. So using the sun, using just some different types of mixes that you can do together. And what the ancient Egyptians actually used for theirs is they used a natural sand mix that actually had baking soda in it. So baking soda is sodium bicarbonate, if you want to know the chemistry of it. And that actually does occur in nature. And so they used something that worked extremely well for drawing moisture out. And so this apple is so dried out because of the baking soda dries it out, but also the salt is really good for drawing moisture out of things because moisture is attracted to salt. It's always going to want to go into that. And if you remember what we talked about before about the osmosis and how nature really likes to keep that balance between things, then you can see that this apple also is having an osmosis where the water is escaping from the apple where it's highly concentrated and then going into this mix where it's not. So that's really the purpose of this. All right, so have you ever actually seen a mummy in real life? I'd like to hear that. I have seen mummies in museums, and I have seen accidental mummies in the desert, mostly things like birds and lizards. But do you have any other questions? If there's none in the comments right now, that is all right. I will come back and check them later. I love to see comments from people. And so if you think of anything later that you'd want to know about mummies, about science, about anything in general, if you want to stump me, if you want to try to find out something new, I love hearing questions about science. If you've got any variations you want to try on this or you have tried, let me know. I'd like to see if you tried to dry things out. So that's another great thing that you could try for this. See what you can dry out and what you can't. And remember that you'll want to talk to people about if you are doing this one because you're going to be leaving food out for quite a long time. And you want to explain to them that you're drying it out and that you're not just leaving an apple out. You could try leaving this cut apple out. If I were to leave this out, I don't think that this would last more than a couple days before it started to completely mold over and smell very, very bad. But all right. So thank you everyone for joining me. Again, my name is Zach. I am coming from you from Hudson Public Library, and this is Science Explosion. Next week, we are going to be talking about teeth, and that should be a lot of fun. Thank you very much. Bye.